So in this session, we're going to review what is document intelligence, a quick example of using that technology in one of our apps, and we're going to review how to set up and create a document intelligence instance. Just as a quick review, we're going to go over how to use the Document Intelligence Studio, including reviewing some of the JSON output. We're going to have a brief overview of custom models, and we'll also have just a code example off at the end. Now, the skills required, so you will need some technical knowledge required for the integration, and there will be some development knowledge as well to use for some of the built-in integrations. You will need a basic understanding of some Business Central concepts, and today we're going to be using two examples. So for the coding example, we're going to use an inventory count. So an inventory count, if you're not familiar, we do have a product that can help out with that. We're going to be extending that product, and we're going to be providing an ability to use document intelligence to populate inventory count data for paper-based counts. For our example of out-of-box behavior, we're going to be using the quality inspector. And if you're not familiar with quality inspections are very simple documents that basically contain things like checklists or measurements. So if you're doing something like receiving product, you can measure and record a quality inspection data, and then you can do things like certificates of analysis or things like that. So at a very high level, those are the two examples we're going to be working with. You will also need a basic understanding of some Azure concepts. If we show a document inside of Business Central and you're not familiar with it, in this session, we're not going to review it, but you can come up to me afterwards when we're in the Ask the Experts lounge, and you can ask for a deep dive. And if I don't know the answer, then we can help out. If you do plan on following along in code, feel free to start your VM now and access it. You can look at the example code right now. We're not going to review it step by step. Instead, what we're going to review is the completed solution. So right now, this is the completed solution. You can open it up and peruse it right now while I'm talking about the setup. There are plain text keys and endpoints in this example code. These are plain text to make it simpler just to give an example code. Please don't store your keys and endpoints in plain text. And these keys and endpoints will be deleted at the end of this conference. So you will need to make your own endpoint after this conference. And you'll come out with the tools knowing how. We're going to be using Business Central, and specifically the Business Central container in your VM. We're going to be using Azure Document Intelligence, and we'll also be using Azure Blobs. Document Intelligence was also recently known as Form Recognizer. And if you're creating resources in Azure, or if you're looking for existing documentation, you're going to find a lot of documentation still refers to it as Form Recognizer. So if you're searching the internet for more details and you're not finding what you're looking for with Document Intelligence, try to search in for Form Recognizer, and chances are you'll probably find a lot more documentation on it. All right, so what is document intelligence? So it is part of Microsoft's AI services, and the easiest way to think of it is OCR plus some machine learning ability. And from an API standpoint, the big difference is it's not just conversion to text from an image. Instead, it actually has a better understanding of what your document means. So what does that mean from a technological point of view? It means that it actually understands what the key value pairs are, and it also understands things like what tables are. And if you train it, then you can even train it on what specific models mean as well. What it's not. So it is not an AI. It's not like ChatGPT. It's not like Copilot. So you don't interact with it in that way. And it's also not part of Microsoft's managed AI Copilot. So if you are in the preview program, or if you're waiting for the Microsoft managed resources to come out, Azure Form Recognizer is not part of that. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to pay a lot of money. Microsoft does have a free option that just has a limited amount of documents that you can use. So you can use it free if you stay within their constraints. Document intelligence does have the ability to train models, but you don't need to for a large portion of use cases. So The use case we're going to go through today is an example of one where you don't need to train the model. We'll also be using the quality inspector, and we'll be using another model there where you don't need to train. But we will briefly review custom models as well. And we're going to briefly review them because for many use cases, you really don't need them. But we'll go through one where you do. All right. So I'm going to go through a quick example of document intelligence with Quality Inspector. Now, what we will be doing is we're going to be going through how this works on the system. And if you do want to see more details, all of this is available on our knowledge base. But really what we're going to be just demonstrating here is just an example of using document intelligence out of the box with one of our apps. And the goal here is not to show you what Quality Inspector can do. The goal here is just to help kind of solidify the idea of the types of things you can do with the document intelligence. And then we're going to move on to our code. So if you do want to follow along, you don't have to, but the example scans that we do have are in your TechWorks sessions, document intelligence, and example scans folder inside of there. And what we're going to be using is a template that does have some bicycle checklist fields inside of here. The actions are going to be on here as well. All right, so let's quickly review what this actually looks like. All right, so to get started, if you haven't already, you do need to make sure that you are in the right role center. A good one would just be Business Manager. There's other ways of getting there, but Business Manager Role Center is a fast and easy way of doing it. So if you're not already in the Business Manager Role Center, make sure that you're heading your way there. All right, so inside of the Quality Inspector, we're just going to head to the Quality Inspection Tests. And what we have is we have ready to go a quality inspection test that has some data available to capture. All right, so we've got a bicycle checklist. I might have more quality inspection tests than you, but really what we're doing is we're just capturing whether or not it's going to be pass or fail. And all of these are just yes or no questions. So a very simple form. Now, what you can do is you can ask the document intelligence system whether or not a form has been filled in. So what we have as part of the session, so if you navigate to your TechWorks 2024 sessions and document intelligence and example scans, if we open up the first example, we're going to see kind of a mix of data. So we're going to see some values that are collected, gear shift check, brakes check, color, ambient temperature. And in this case, we're using handwriting. So you can use handwriting in here. Now, what I've got is also a few questions that aren't on the test. All right, so there are ways of adding in extra fields that you want. In this case, we're just demonstrating how you could use it where the data may have extra data that you don't care about. All right, so in this case here, we do care about things like gear shift check, brakes check, visual check, but the form also has other data we don't care about. All right, and document intelligence will still capture that. Likewise, we've got another full example where it's completely filled in as well, where it matches perfectly. So if we were to simply head over to more options, we're going to scan our page, and we're going to scan our page with upload. Now, in the real world, if you were using a feature like this, you'd probably be using your camera, you'd probably be using Business Central on your phone and just taking a picture and uploading it. And then you'd be using something like Scan Page with Camera. I'm with a projector up here in front of the screen, so I'm just going to be choosing this actual picture. So we're just going to head over to Sessions. We're going to navigate over to our example scans, and we're going to be choosing our first example. So in this case here, really what's happening behind the scenes is we're taking that image, which could be from a camera or your picture, whatever it may be. We're uploading it to Azure Document Intelligence. We're asking it what the fields are, and it comes back with those fields, and we're simply filling in those fields. So in this case here, it happened to match 100%. Everything was all yes. What you could also do, though, is if you're using the system with handwritten values, so let's choose the other example where it has the handwritten values. So it uploads again to Azure Blob Storage, takes that Azure Blob Storage image, passes it over to Document Intelligence, and then it fills in. Now, what we can see here is actually an example of where some values are out of order, right? So you'll notice in the image, things like the gear shift check are first, but this is showing us brake check first. And you'll notice in the image, we have things like, handwritten checkbox. And in this case, it's not actually detecting that, right? So there is still some pragmatic analysis you actually have to do with the results that you get back from the system. So in this case, this is a good example of how things like checkbox, we're interpreting through the code as no. All right, so you do have some value inside of there to determine that. All right. So how do you actually set this up? So you will need an Azure Blob container, and this is where you need to store incoming files for training if you are using custom model training. And again, you don't actually need to train it for your custom model, but if you are, you need a minimum of 5. And you need an Azure Document Intelligence instance. Okay, now everything we're about to review is documented on our knowledge base. It is documented in the quality inspection section, but the steps for creating an Azure Document Intelligence instance are exactly the same, whether or not you use Quality Inspector or something else. All right, so we are going to head off to our Azure. So we're going to navigate to portal.azure.com. All right, so portal.azure.com. And the first thing we need to do is we need to create a storage account. All right, so we're going to navigate over to storage accounts. We're going to create a new one, and we're going to call this IWX TechWorks 2024, and we shall call this set 23. All right, now for performance, you don't need anything fancy in general. The primary service is we're just going to use Azure Blob Storage, and the primary workload, you don't even have to tell it, but the redundancy, you can just keep it locally redundant. Like at the end of the day, this is a temporary image that you need to create. So the reason why you're using an Azure Blob Storage account is a place for the Azure Document Intelligence to actually look at that image in the first place. If you already have that image available and it has a publicly accessible link, you can definitely just use that already, right? And you can feed it in publicly accessible links as well. So if you just want to use something like a OneDrive link, as long as it has a publicly accessible view-only link, that'll also work. All right, once this is deploying, the next step that we're going to do is we're going to create a blob container, and we also need to make anonymous blob access available for easier setup. So again, this comes down to security. Now, at this point in time, Microsoft doesn't yet have an ability to use service principals in the document intelligence. I believe they mentioned that we're doing that soon. But in the meantime, you can just use a URL. And the way to secure that would be with something like a shared access signature. All right, so if we navigate over to our storage account, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to navigate over to our settings, go to our configuration, and we're going to enable this blob anonymous access and save it. Now, you're going to notice with this specific setting, it may take up to 30 seconds, they say. Realistically, I've seen this usually take a few minutes, all right? And the easiest way to tell whether or not it actually saved, other than just refreshing it, well, in this case it did in fact take it immediately, is when you're creating the account, if you don't see that private access or that anonymous access, all right? And again, the reason we're doing an anonymous access in this case is we really just need a simple way to store a generic image for a temporary period of time while we're passing it over to Azure Document Intelligence. All right. Okay, so now that we have that storage account, what we're going to do is we're going to create a container. And a container, the easiest way to think of is just as a drive. All right, so you're going to navigate over to your container. You're going to create a container. I'm going to just use the same name as the storage account for this example. And my anonymous access, I want container for simplicity for development. And I'm going to create it. All right, once I have my container, you can just click into it. And if you navigate over to your settings, you're going to have your shared access token. All right, now what you can do with that shared access token is you can also refine the permissions. All right, so in this case here, our example code is going to be using the same shared access signature to create the image as well as later access it. What you could do is you could have two, so you could have one to create it, or you could use Azure Blob to create the actual image and then use a read-only one for Azure Document Intelligence. There's a lot of ways of doing this. Ultimately, though, it's a temporary image that we're using to store it. And we're also going to have the ability to delete that afterwards, right? So we're going to have, in our case, basically everything. And we're going to cause this to last as long as the session, and we're going to generate that shared access signature token. So you're going to want to keep this shared access signature token for your value. All right, and on top of that, what you're going to want is in the resource itself, you're going to want to make sure that you've also got access to the container name and in our case, the storage account name as well. Okay, so once you've got all that, the next step is document intelligence as well. So document intelligence, again, is another Azure resource that we're going to be creating. So we're going to head back into our portal.azure.com, and it's really as simple as just searching for document intelligences. We're going to create one, and here's a good example of the form recognizer. We're just going to create a new form recognizer or a new Azure. We'll call this in my TechWorks 2024, and I will call this IWX TechWorks 2024 September 23. All right, now for the pricing tier, I don't have access to the free tier anymore because I've already created a free one. But if you are following along, or if you're creating this on your own system afterwards, you will have access to, or you should have access to a free tier. And that free tier, I believe, gives you up to 500 images a month. It's also going to be a little bit slower, and it will also be throttled for the training. Now, the paid one does cost money, but not a lot, right? So for the first 1,000,000 pages, it's going to cost $1.50 for every 1,000 page, right? So it's not free, but it is pretty darn cheap. So if you're doing something like data entry saving, it's obviously going to pay off for itself as well. All right, so we're going to head back into our portal. We're going to review and create. And once this actually gets created, what we're going to do is we're going to get the endpoint and then the key. All right, and we can use that in the document intelligence and also our code. All right, so far, all we've done is we've created the Azure Blob storage account and storage container, and that's how we create a place to store the images that we want Azure Document Intelligence to analyze. And then we're creating the Document Intelligence instance itself to actually do the analysis. All right, so now it's deploying. And again, this can take a few minutes to deploy. Now, once it's actually deployed, what's going to happen is you'll have access to the endpoint and the key, and all you really need to do is just copy and paste that for your actual code. All right, so we can see this is now created. And so if we were to head off to our document intelligence, we will be able to see all those details. All right, so if we navigate back to our document intelligence instances, and we head to our example for the 23rd, what we're going to see is we're going to see the, there we'll navigate to the We're going to go to that resource group and we're going to take a look at our document intelligence instance. All right, and there's our instance now. All right, now the value you're going to want is just right on this main page, the endpoint and the keys. If you click here to manage keys, it's just got the older key style thing, right? So you're going to want to copy that and paste that into your code. All right, now you don't need to keep track of any of that because we have inside of those code examples a key available for you. Okay, models. Now, there are a lot of models available for you already, and you can also create a custom one. So although we could use a custom one, you don't really need to for most examples, right? So if we were to head into document intelligence, and if we were to take a look at that intelligence that we just made, we're going to navigate to the Document Intelligence Studio. The general document really works for many scenarios. All right. So as an example, if we were to head into general documents, and I just log in here really quick, now you're going to notice it's going to ask to connect with a subscription, resource group, etc. You can also use that API endpoint and key that you just created. That's also valid. So in this case here, we would just navigate to our key that we just created. So we're going to navigate to our document intelligence, navigate in there, and then capture that key and then send that key in. All right, so we're going to copy that key, navigate back to our document intelligence, and then finish that off. All right, so the first time you load document intelligence with that general document, it does give some examples, and you can just run those examples to kind of see how they work. So they have a very simple document that just has a general information about Microsoft. You've got another one with, in their example, a permit, and we can see also another example of an employment qualification form, right? So these are examples of the kinds of forms that you could interpret. And you can run them if you're curious just to run it on the system. So for example, if we run this, we can see that as it's analyzing the employment form, it's going to get back a bunch of useful information. Now, in here, we can already see how it has the immediate value, right? So you can see all the key value pairs that it's actually extracted, and you'll notice that it also has that confidence level rating associated with it. All right, so if we were to, for example, take a look at this if yes, you can see here it's a little bit confused, and you as the programmer can make a decision. What do you want to do with that confidence level, right? So what is the minimum level? Right. So we're going to analyze a different example. So if we were to head up to our example scans and we head over to our first count example. So in our inventory count, this is a typical inventory count sheet. This is coming from our system, and this is for paper-based counts, right? So it's got a spot to put in the item, spot to put in the bin, spot to put in the quantity. And in this case here, for paper-based count, somebody's filling it in. Now, in a more typical fashion, you'd probably be using something like the handheld scanners to actually do counts. But if you're still using paper-based counts, you'd still be filling it in by hand, right? And you'd be passing off these counts over to somebody. So in this case here, I've got an example of some handwritten text inside of here. And I've tried to include some examples of legible text and also illegible text, so we can see what the system's doing, right? So we can see here, I've got 07. I'm using a dash on the 7 nomenclature. I've also got some messy 8s in here, and a little bit of interesting text as it's actually going over and overlapping some of the lines. All right. So if we run that example and it runs through the document analysis and we run it, And this is really what's going to happen as you're running it behind the scenes. And this is what Quality Inspector does, right? It just uploads that image over to Azure Blob, creates a temporary image, sends it to document analysis. When it's done, it deletes it. All right. So in terms of the key value pairs, we can see things like the count, the sheet, counted by, which happens to be blank, but is smart enough to realize that, it probably should have a label. And now what we're going to notice, or the part that's more interesting for us, is it's correctly detected that this is a table. All right. And this is even with like skewed data and kind of poorly written data. But if we click on it, we can actually see all of the individual values that it's created from there. All right. And if we navigate over to content and on the tables, you can see the table value that it's actually analyzed as part of that. All right. Now, what you're going to notice is on the code section, you'll have full code examples for different languages, not for AAL, but still portable. But the interesting bit is going to be in the JSON output. All right. So for example, if you were to look for something like the 11, right? So we can see that the content of 11, it has the polygon for what it thinks it is, and it also has the confidence for that, right? So it thinks, or it's 78% confident that that is the text number 11. All right. And it knows roughly where that would be. Okay. If we were to run, we'll do one more example here. And if we were to run, say, another version of this, another variant. So in this case here, this is a lot more simple. We just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of coming down the road. And our other example here is more filled in, but also has some interesting text that can kind of go in. So in this case here, I've simulated somebody crossing things out, also putting in an X or putting in a checkbox. All right. And we can see what it's going to do with these values. Now, the interesting part is, what do you as a programmer want to happen? All right. With those values. So let's take a look at this count 3, and let's see what it actually does with the analysis. All right. So it's running the analysis. And after it runs it, it's going to correctly detect it. And you'll notice here, it's got lower confidence ratings on this, right? So it does still detect the values, but it also interprets them kind of differently. And now we also need to make a decision as a programmer, what do we want to do with that? So for example, for that first one, that 1151, it did detect that it was a checkbox, but then it's still up to us to decide what to do with that, right? So for something like in the context of an inventory count, what does a checkbox mean, right? So you have access to the fact that it was a checkbox, but what do you do with that information, right? So to me, does that mean it's been fully counted, or that just one has been counted? That's something where you would have to still have some knowledge of your task to figure out what to do. All right. Now, in some cases, it's not detecting it at all. So as we're heading down into something like the 99 and the other values in there where I've got the X, it's got an X, it thinks that means a checkbox. And then the one right underneath, it's got the checkbox. But you'll notice with that cross out, it still thinks that's a checkbox, right? So there's certain things that it needs to kind of consider when you're integrating in your models. Okay. Custom model training. So you will need a minimum of 5 PDFs, and there is a wizard available to go through your custom models. Really, your custom models, you're probably not going to need. So an example of a custom model where it would be useful would be something like the dynamic ship invoice reconciliation, which does use a custom model. Right. So for the first part of the invoice, it's pretty straightforward. You probably don't actually need a model there. But as it actually goes through some of the table details that you could get from something like Canada Post, this would be a good example of some values where a custom model would have value, right? So their table structure is not a nice simple table. It's kind of like a table within a table. The values mean completely different documents. You can have multiple rows that kind of represent the same thing. And these would be good examples of how you could use a custom model to read in that data. Now, is it still doable without a custom model? 100%. But this is where custom models can provide more value. Now, custom models as well also do cost more when you're analyzing them, right? So with the free tier, you will have still the same limitations, but it does cost more to actually deploy. And then for actual deployment, there's a complicating factor there too, in that you actually need to deploy that custom model to whatever your target is, right? So if you're trying to incorporate this into your own app that you plan on having on, say, AppSource, it's something you need to consider. How are you actually going to deploy your custom model to your end customer, right? Because this is still all sensitive customer data, right? So we don't want to, have a single instance or otherwise have it not secured. Now, when it does create it, you actually end up with a custom little endpoint, but you can do things like actually name the fields as well, right? So instead of like looking for and hoping the system automatically detects it, is you can pre-label absolutely everything that you care about inside of it. But with that said, the general document for most header line based is usually all you actually need. All right. Now, as a programmer and as a consultant, when you're looking at this, there's really two things that we're going to be caring about. And the first off is going to just be the key value pairs. So things like labels, and you'll typically find that on the header part of your document. So things like the customer name, addresses, invoice totals, things like that. You'll find that in the key value pair section on the document intelligence. And then probably the most interesting thing is going to be the tables for the line details. All right. Now, in our example today, in the code example that you're going to have, it is only the table that we're going to be looking at. So it gives you boilerplate code for that, but our code is only going to be looking at the actual table portion of that. Now, if you haven't already, now would be a good time to pop open your Visual Studio Code and navigating over to the sessions and the document intelligence session. All of this code is also available as well at the iwx.app TechWorks 2024 sessions. Important, so these endpoints and keys will be deleted later today. You're not going to be able to use them. So if you do want to just poke at it and see what it's going to be like, if you're trying this at home later on or even at the airport, it's not going to work. You do need to create your own endpoint, and you do need to just change those settings inside of there. All right. And just in case it's not super obvious, this is a shared endpoint. You're all using the same endpoint. Don't upload any sensitive data. All right. Don't upload your customer data. Don't upload your own private data. Don't upload any data that is private or confidential or otherwise should not be publicly available. All right. This is an example code for you to refer to. Okay. So we're just going to head right off into the actual code here. So we're going to navigate to VS Code. All right, and inside of VS Code, what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, Open Folder, and we're going to look for our example scans, our sessions, our document intelligence session, and then our inventory count example. Okay, so feel free to deploy this to your system right now if you want to take a quick look. But our example code, it's really straightforward. We're really just doing on the inventory count, we're going to have a simple field that just gives a note that we're going to be using. We simply are showing that field as well. And that's going to be on the inventory count sheet lines. And we're just adding an action. So kind of like Quality Inspector where you had the ability to upload an image. We're going to do the same thing here. You're just going to have the ability to scan a page. Now, if you wanted to get fancy, you could do something like the camera axis as well. But this is just a ready to go prompt for that, right? It's a simple action. Now, the code unit is quite large, and what we've done is we've put in the entire boilerplate for the whole thing end to end inside of a single spot. And at the top is going to be where you're going to find all the keys and things like that. So if you are taking this home, you will need to just basically replace things like the storage account, storage container name, things like that, document intelligence URL. All of this you're going to need to replace. These will stop working at the end of today. All right. Now, we're just going to do some brief walking through of what this actually looks like. But basically, we're going to start off with that prompt for upload, document, and analyze. And all this is going to do is just ask them for the image. And once that, it's going to take that and upload that to Azure Blob Storage. All right. So back earlier on, when we made that link, all we're doing here is we're just taking that and uploading it into Azure Blob Storage itself. Then we're analyzing the document, and then we're deleting the blob, right? So that's the high level flow. So if we dig into the uploading to Azure Blob, we're just using the ABS blob client in there, so there's nothing terribly fancy with it. We're just generating a blob name to use. So again, nothing terribly fancy there. And as part of our public-facing URL, we're just using the standard convention for the container in there. All right. So there's nothing terribly complex in there. Analyze document is a little bit where everything actually starts getting into document intelligence itself, right? So there's really three things you need to do to interact with the document intelligence API. The first is you have to submit it. And as part of that submission, you have to be using that public-facing URL of the blob that you just created, right? So now that we have uploaded that blob image with that shared access signature, we've now got a link that we can use to send to document intelligence. And again, you don't need Azure Blob Storage. It could just be anything else, but it's a quick and dirty way of just having a link that you can give to document intelligence. All right, so now we've got that link. Now the first bit is going to be submitting it. And once you submit it, what's going to happen is you're going to get back a JSON that has a URL that you need to pull. All right, so it's an asynchronous pattern that they're giving you, and you basically pull this URL until it's done. And once it's done, then you can actually read in the results. All right, so submitting it is pretty straightforward. So we're just going to navigate into submit. We're going to see the source that we actually need to submit in. And all we're really doing is we're just posting off that content. All right, and it's a very simple document. Now, in our case here, we're just using a standard model. And really all we're doing is we're just putting in the URL of what we want to actually monitor. Okay, to get the polling done, we've got all this inside of the wait until ready. And really all we're doing is we're just taking that operation, calling it several times, and then waiting until we've actually got a successful result. And then once we've got a successful result, then we actually get to analyze it. All right, so that JSON that we saw, that's where we get to actually read those results from the document intelligence. So in here, you're just reading it into a JSON object. And then once you got that JSON object, there's just an example of how to actually process it. All right. And in this example code that you have for free, all we're doing is we are just going through the table in a very simple form. Now, in our example, where we do have those example scans, the format is pretty straightforward, right? So we know ahead of time that the first column is going to be quantity, second one's item, third one's bin. So we've just hard coded that in this example code. But if you wanted to get fancy, you could do things like actually read the key value pairs or read the header structure on the tables to figure out what those next steps would be. Okay, and then once we actually get those values, we're just reading in all the different cells and column. I do have a little helper function just to help navigate how to find that content for you in the jQuery. So that's using the JToken finder. But once you do have that, you have that ability to read in that row and column, and then you can actually do your work. And our work is very straightforward. All we are doing is basically just reading in or taking that item that they have, the text, the quantity, and then figuring out what to do with it. All right. And then we're updating that example note field based on the quantity that we're providing into the system. All right. And if we can't read anything at all from it, then we're just going to put in that invalid add quantity. And we're either going to insert it or we're going to modify it. So pretty straightforward. All right. So if we publish that, what we can see, so we're just going to publish that into our system. And this should be ready to go. So you can publish this at any time and follow along inside of your own system. So it's going to be navigating to TechWorks. Perfect. We're going to log in. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to our inventory count. So if you remember at the beginning of the session, at a very high level, inventory counts are really just a way to count your inventory. So we're going to pop one open. And in my case here, I happen to have a very simple example. So I've got one count sheet in here. I'm counting 2 items, and I don't have any values in it just yet. So, but I do have the values 1000, our bicycle, and 1001. Now, if we take a look at those example sheets, I do have those values 1000 and 1001, but I also have a heck of a lot more items as well, right? So what we're going to do inside of that code example is we've got that ability to actually do that insert all the way through. So we've done that. And now we're going to run off that actions of ours. We're going to head over to our example scan page. We're going to choose our file here. So let's start off with a more simple example. So we're going to choose this example here where we have 1001 has a value, 1120 does, 1200 does. It's not everything inside of there, but it's a good one to start off with. We're going to pop that open. So behind the scenes, what this is doing is this is now taking that image that I just chose, it's uploading that over to Azure Blob Storage. It's creating that URL that it has with that shared access signature. Once it has that shared access signature URL, it's sending it over to Document Intelligence to process. It's then Document Intelligence gives us back a URL to pull. We pull that URL until it gives us the flag that it's done. And then once it's done, we then grab the results and the response. And then we can see all of this in action. So now we can see that it's updated everything, and we can see more details about why, right? So we can see it's been updated from Document Intelligence, and also it's added in all these other values from Document Intelligence as well. All right. So this has been a end-to-end example of using Azure Document Intelligence all the way through.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more great content, and remember to hit that bell icon to stay updated. See you in the next video.